Chỉ mất đúng 9 từ đề, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez nhận ra mình vừa xúc phạm nhằm một quý ông miền Nam. Có lẽ thượng nghị sĩ nên đi học một lớp kinh tế. 9 từ, đó là tất cả những gì cần thiết. 9 từ được nói ra với sự tự mãn hổ hững, sự kiêu ngạo theo bản năng, sự tự tin tuyệt đối vào trí tuệ của mình đến nỗi cô ấy không bao giờ nhìn thấy cái bẫy mình đang bước vào, không bao giờ thấy con sư tử mình đang chọc ghẹo, không bao giờ nhận ra rằng vị luật sư miền Nam chặt phác với cặp kính đọc sách và cái cấp tài liệu xếp nếp to một cách lố bịch sắp sửa ban cho cô một bài học mà cô sẽ không bao giờ quên. Nhưng tôi đang nói quá xa rồi. Hãy để tôi kể lại bối cảnh, vì chính bối cảnh sẽ khiến sự hủy diệt đó ngọt ngào hơn nhiều. Đó là một phiên điều trần chung của Thượng viện và Hạ viện về chính sách kinh tế và khả năng cạnh tranh của Mỹ. Một trong những màn trình diễn ở Washington thường chỉ tạo ra những câu nói sáo rộng và những luận điểm thiên vị. Phòng điều trần chật kín người. C-SPAN đã cho nhiều máy quay ghi hình, biết rằng với việc AOC điều trần về các đề xuất Green New Deal của cô ấy, những màn đối đầu gay gắt có thể sẽ xảy ra. Cô ngồi ở bàn nhân chung, được các thành viên biết đời ở khu vực khán đài phía sau hỗ trợ, trông giống hệt một nhà cách mạng trẻ tự tin. Kính mặt hàng hiệu, son môi đỏ đẫm và vẻ mặt quan tâm chân thành dành cho người lao động. Cô ấy đã điều trần khoảng 45 phút liên tục sử dụng các từ khóa như giao thoa, thay đổi hệ thống và công lý chuyển đổi, mà không ai thách thức cô ấy về ý nghĩa thực sự của bất kỳ điều gì trong số đó. Rồi đến lượt thượng nghị sĩ John Kennedy đặt câu hỏi. Ông ngồi ở cuối ghế ủy ban, kính hai tròng đất trên mũi, sắp xếp giấy tờ từ một tập tài liệu xếp nếp dày một cách vô lý, trông như một đạo cụ trong một vở hài kịch. Ông trông giống như mọi luật sư miền Nam mà bạn từng thấy. Bô vest hơi nhăn nhúm, cà vạt hơi lệch một chút. Giọng Louisiana đặc sét khiến mỗi câu nói nghe như ông đang kể chuyện trên hiên nhà ở đâu đó. Dễ bị đánh giá thấp. Chết người khi coi thường. Thưa nữ nghị sĩ, ông bắt đầu, giọng nói thân thiện và tò mò. Tôi đã lắng nghe lời khai của bà về thỏa thuận xanh mới và tôi phải thừa nhận tôi hơi bối rối với một số con số. Kế hoạch của bà kêu gọi loại bỏ hoàn toàn việc sử dụng nhiên liệu hóa thạch trong vòng 10 năm, cải tạo mọi tòa nhà ở Mỹ và đảm bảo việc làm cho mọi người. Văn phòng Ngân sách Quốc hội ước tính chi phí khoảng 93.000 tỷ đô la trong một thập kỷ. Giờ đây, tổng GDP của Mỹ là khoảng 25.000 tỷ đô la mỗi năm. Vì vậy, tôi đang cố gắng hiểu. Đó là lúc cô ấy mắc sai lầm. AOC ngắt lời, giọng nói đầy vẻ khinh thường. Thưa thượng nghị sĩ, với tất cả sự tôn trọng, có lẽ ông nên tham gia một lớp kinh tế thay vì dựa vào những suy nghĩ lỗi thời từ những người đàn ông lớn tuổi ở miền Nam không hiểu lý thuyết kinh tế hiện đại. Các chi phí này là các khoản đầu tư, không phải là chi tiêu. Và thẳng thắn mà nói, kiểu phân tích đơn giản này chính là lý do tại sao chúng ta cần một lãnh đạo mới thực sự hiểu sự phức tạp của các hệ thống kinh tế đương đại. Cả phòng im lặng như tờ. Đầu mối phóng viên ngang lên khỏi điện thoại của họ. Các máy quay phóng to. Các thành viên biết đời trên khán đài thực sự trông có vẻ lo lắng. Họ biết danh tiếng của Kennedy, ngay cả khi AOC rõ ràng là không. Kennedy chậm rãi tháo kính đọc sách, đặt chúng xuống bàn phía trước với vẻ cẩn thận thái quá và mỉm cười. Nụ cười đó, bất cứ ai từng thấy John Kennedy tham vấn một nhân chứng thù địch đều biết nụ cười đó. Đó là nụ cười của một kẻ săn mới vừa nhận ra con mồi đã tự bước vào vùng sát thương. Ông để sự im lặng kéo dài. 5 giây. 10. 15. AOC dịch chuyển không thoải mái, có lẽ bắt đầu nhận ra mình đã tính toán sai. Chủ tịch ủy ban trông như muốn can thiệp, nhưng không biết làm thế nào. Cuối cùng, Kennedy lên tiếng, giọng nói vẫn ngọt ngào như mật. Chà, nữ nghị sĩ bà thật hào phóng khi đưa ra lời khuyên giáo dục. Rất tử tế, tôi đánh giá cao điều đó. Ông ngừng lại, nụ cười càng nở rộng. Thực ra, tôi đã học một số lớp kinh tế tại Đại học Vanderbilt, nơi tôi tốt nghiệp với bằng danh dự. Sau đó là tại trường luật Đại học Virginia, nơi tôi học kinh tế hiến pháp và chính sách kinh tế. Và sau đó tại Đại học Oxford, nơi tôi là học giả Rhodes và học dưới sự hướng dẫn của giáo sư John Well cùng nhiều người khác. Người đàn ông xuất sắc, thực sự hiểu lý thuyết kinh tế của mình. Một khoảng lặng khác, ông cầm một tài liệu từ chồng giấy tờ của mình lên. Bà đã học kinh tế tại Đại học Boston, đúng không? Quan hệ quốc tế và kinh tế, tôi tin là vậy. Bà đã học thế nào trong các lớp kinh tế của mình? Tôi chỉ tò mò thôi, vì bà đang đề nghị giáo dục tôi. Mắt AOC bắt đầu đỏ bừng, nhưng Kennedy vẫn chưa dừng lại. You're absolutely spot on about one thing. I am an old Southern man, guilty as charged, and I do rely on some old-fashioned thinking. Things like basic arithmetic, supply and demand, the relationship between incentives and outcomes. Yeah, those sorts of outdated concepts. He opened up his accordion file, and papers spilled all across his desk. Now, since you think I need some educating, why don't you educate me, Kerry? Let's go through your Green New Deal, line by line. I've got questions. I've got your own statements, lots of them. And I've got a whole mess of facts right here that I reckon might surprise you. Kennedy looked directly into the C-SPAN camera. Folks watching at home, what you're about to witness is what happens when ideology meets arithmetic, when confidence meets competence, when a bartender who took some economics classes at BEU tries to lecture a Rhodes Scholar economist. Stay with me. This is going to be educational. He turned back to AOC, and his expression changed. That folksy charm was still there, but underneath, there was something sharp and dangerous. So, let's begin your education, Congresswoman. Kennedy settled back in his chair, the very picture of Southern comfort. But his eyes were sharp as he pulled out the first section of documents. Now, Congresswoman, before we go discussing your plan to revolutionize the entire American economy, I'm curious about something. See, you talk a whole lot about income inequality, about the rich not paying their fair share, about working-class struggles, and I respect that. Those are important issues, truly. But I'm having a little trouble reconciling your message with your lifestyle. Now, maybe you can help this old Southern man understand the nuance I'm missing. He pulled out a large photo. He had it displayed on the screen right behind him. September 13th, 2021. The Met Gala. You attended, wearing a custom dress that said, "Tax the Rich" in big red letters across the back. A powerful statement. Very on-brand indeed. The dress was designed by Brothers, a luxury brand. Now, you've said the dress was borrowed and the ticket was gifted, which is mighty convenient. But let's talk about that ticket. Kennedy pulled out a financial document. Now, tickets to the Met Gala cost $35,000. $35,000, that's more than many Americans make in 8 months of full-time work. And you attended this event, one of the most exclusive, elitist gatherings in the world, surrounded by billionaires and millionaires, celebrities, and designer gowns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of it just to make a statement about taxing the rich. He looked up, genuinely puzzled. Now, help me understand the economics of that. You're telling working-class Americans that the rich are the problem, while you're literally partying with them at an event that costs more to attend than a year of community college, mind you. Now, where's the nuance there? AOC tried to respond. It was about making a statement in spaces where... Making a statement. Kennedy interrupted gently. I see. Very important. Indeed. Now, let's talk about another statement you made with your choice of vehicle. And he pulled out DMV records. You drive a Tesla Model 3. Beautiful car. Very environmentally conscious. It costs about $48,000, depending on the options. Now, that's $8,000 more than the median household income in your district. The very people you represent, many of them make less in a year than your car even cost. Kennedy flipped through papers, narrating as he went, "And you bought this Tesla while pushing the Green New Deal, which would eliminate gas-powered vehicles. Force Americans to switch to electric cars they can't afford." See, the average working person in your district can't just drop $48,000 on a brand new car. They can't afford the $1,200 home charging station. They certainly can't afford the higher electricity bills that come with charging an EV. He looked up, all innocence. "But you can. You already have the Tesla, so your Green New Deal works great for you. But what about that single mom working 2 jobs who needs a 10-year-old Honda Civic to get to work? Now, where does she get $48,000? Or should she just take the bus and arrive late to both jobs?" The audience was riveted. Kennedy's tone was still friendly, still curious, but the questions were landing like body blows. "Now, speaking of where you live," Kennedy continued, pulling out rental agreements. "You currently reside in a luxury apartment building in the Navy Yard neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Beautiful area, very trendy. Your rent is $300 to $400 per month." He did the math out loud, slowly. "That's $4,800 per year just for rent. Now, you know what the average rent in the Bronx is? The area you represent? About $1,800 a month. You're paying almost double to live in luxury in D.C. while representing people who struggle to make any rent at all." Kennedy pulled out expense reports, held them up. "And let's talk about your dining habits. Campaign finance reports reveal spending at some of New York and D.C.'s most exclusive restaurants. We're talking team dinners at places where the cheapest entree will set you back $65. And strategy meetings? Those involved $400 bottles of wine. You've managed to spend over $47,000 of campaign money on high-end dining in just the past 2 years. He read from one receipt with dramatic care. "Here's one strategy dinner, Le Bernardin, $1,884.70. That's one dinner, Congresswoman, just one meal at a Michelin 3-star restaurant where the tasting menu alone costs $350 per person before you even consider wine. You shelled out almost $2,000 on a single dinner, all while representing people who need to clip coupons just to afford their groceries." Kennedy then leaned back, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "So, if this old Southern man can try to understand your economic philosophy correctly, let me see. Let me try to grasp the nuance," he added with a clear snort. "Working-class Americans are expected to sacrifice. They need to trade in their affordable gas cars for expensive electric vehicles they can't even afford. They're told to accept higher energy costs. They must limit their consumption. They're supposed to fundamentally change their lifestyles for the environment and for economic justice." He paused for dramatic effect. "But you get the Tesla. You get the €3,400 a month luxury apartment. You get to attend $35,000 PURRI galas. You get to eat at restaurants where one dinner costs more than your constituents spend on food in an entire month. You get to live exactly like the rich people you claim to oppose." His voice then hardened just a fraction. "That's not socialism, Congresswoman. That's not economic justice. That's aristocracy. That's let them eat cake with a much better brand. You're essentially Marie Antoinette with an Instagram account and better publicity. You're telling people to make sacrifices while you, yourself, sacrifice absolutely nothing." AOC quickly tried to defend herself. "My lifestyle isn't relevant to the policy." "Your lifestyle is completely relevant." Kennedy's voice cracked like a whip. Because it plainly shows that you don't actually believe what you're out there preaching. If you truly thought climate change was an existential crisis, you'd be living in a modest apartment and donating the rent difference to environmental causes. If you genuinely believed in economic equality, you would be living at the same level as your constituents. But you don't, because your socialism is for other people, not for yourself. He then pulled out another thick folder. But if you think your lifestyle hypocrisy is bad, just wait until we examine how you actually make your money. Because, Congresswoman, that's where your economic genius truly shines through. Kennedy then looked directly into the camera. If you're tired of champagne socialists who preach sacrifice while living in luxury, then you absolutely need to hear what comes next. Because her lifestyle is truly just the appetizer. Kennedy shuffled papers around, pulling out a new section marked with bright red tabs. His expression settled somewhere between amusement and sheer disgust. Now, Congresswoman, you tried to deflect by saying we should focus on systemic issues rather than individual choices. I just love that progressive trick. Avoid personal accountability by making everything sound systemic. But let's actually talk about a system. Specifically, let's talk about the system you yourself created to funnel campaign money directly to your boyfriend. He pulled out Federal Election Commission filings, holding them up for everyone to see. Riley Roberts, your boyfriend, now fiancé, if the tabloids are correct, nice young man I'm sure, went to BYU with you. And since 2018, his company, the LLC, he set up, has received over $120,000 in payments from your campaign for marketing and consulting services. Kennedy put on his reading glasses, studying the documents with exaggerated concentration. Now, I've run campaigns for over 20 years, and $120,000 for marketing is a very substantial amount of money. So naturally, I had my staff research what Mr. Roberts actually delivered for that six-figure payment. What exactly did his consulting accomplish? What were the actual deliverables? He looked up with an air of innocent curiosity. Turns out, nobody knows. No portfolio, no case studies, no documented marketing materials beyond what your regular campaign staff already produced. No client testimonials, except those from your own campaign. He got paid $120,000 to do what exactly? Help you pick Instagram filters? Proofread your tweets? Tell you which selfie angle works best? Scattered laughter erupted from the conservative side of the gallery. AOC's face was visibly turning crimson. But Mr. Roberts's consulting fees are truly just the beginning. Kennedy continued, pulling out merchandise sales reports. Let's talk about your real moneymaker, your campaign store, your merchandise empire. He held up a sweatshirt, price tag still attached. Tax the Rich sweatshirt. Retail price, $58. Very popular with college kids who absolutely love socialism. You've sold thousands of these. Also available, Green New Deal t-shirts for $30. Abolish ICE's hoodies for $65. And various other revolutionary merchandise. Your total sales over the past 3 years? A whopping $4.2 million. Kennedy just let that figure hang there, unspoken for a moment. $4 million, all from selling anti-capitalism merchandise to college students. The irony there is so thick, you could practically spread it on toast. Then, he pulled out a detailed cost analysis spreadsheet. All right, let's chat about those profit margins of yours. That $30 t-shirt you're selling, the production cost, including printing and shipping, comes out to about $4.50. You're selling it for $30, which is an astounding 566 markup. Honestly, Your profit margins are better than most Fortune 500 companies achieve. You are, quite literally, the capitalist pig dog your own slogans preach against. Kennedy leaned in closer, his voice absolutely dripping with sarcasm. And where exactly are these revolutionary garments being manufactured? Well, isn't that just fascinating? You won't disclose it. Your campaign store conveniently doesn't list the manufacturer. Quite mysterious indeed. However, independent journalists have done some digging, and it seems production is happening overseas. Possibly Bangladesh, maybe Vietnam. But definitely not American-made. And definitely not union labor. He looked her straight in the eye. So, just to quickly sum up your business model, you're pulling in capitalist-level profit margins, selling socialist merchandise, all of it made by underpaid foreign workers. And you're doing this all while actively attacking American capitalism and constantly preaching about workers' rights. Did I get that right? AOC tried to jump in, but Kennedy simply raised a finger. Oh, I'm far from finished with your financial genius. Now, let's take a peek at how your campaign chooses to spend its money. He then pulled out a stack of detailed expense reports. Your campaign has shelled out over $310,000 on luxury hotels and high-end restaurants in just the past 2 years. Look, I get that campaigns have expenses, but let me read some specific entries because they're quite illuminating. Kennedy put on his reading glasses once more, speaking slowly and deliberately. A team dinner at Per Se, $1,103. That, for the record, is one of New York's most expensive restaurants. Their tasting menu alone is $350 per person. A strategy meeting at Blue Hill, $1,240. Yet another fine dining establishment right here in Manhattan. A campaign retreat at a luxury resort. $47,000 for a single weekend for your staff. First-class airfare for travel. $89,000 over 1 year, when Coach would have been perfectly fine. And accommodations in 5-star hotels. $124,000 when Holiday Inns are readily available. He then set the papers down and looked up at her. You spent more on just one dinner at Per Se than many of your constituents spend on groceries in 2 whole months. You also spent more on a single weekend campaign retreat than the average American family earns in an entire year. And you did all of this while constantly preaching about economic justice and lambasting the wealthy for their excess. Kennedy then pulled out his calculator and crunched some numbers. Here's what truly bothers me. If you had simply chosen mid-range hotels instead of those luxury ones, if you had flown Coach instead of first class, if you had held your strategy meetings at Applebee's instead of Michelin-starred restaurants, your campaign could have saved approximately $267,000 over 2 years. Do you know what you could actually do with $267,000 in a district suffering from widespread poverty? You could fund scholarships, job training programs, small business grants. You could genuinely help people. His voice suddenly hardened. But you didn't do that. You chose luxury instead. You chose excess. You chose to live exactly like the wealthy elites you constantly criticize. Because your socialism, it's clearly a brand, not a genuine belief system. Kennedy then shifted gears, pulling out an entirely new document. Now, let's revisit your economics education, since that's what you offered to provide me. You claimed I didn't understand modern economic theory. So, let's just do some really basic math here. And I mean truly basic. The kind they teach right there in high school. He then displayed a chart on the screen for everyone to see. Your Green New Deal proposes spending a staggering $93 trillion over the next 10 years. That's not my number, by the way. That's the Congressional Budget Office's own estimate. $93 trillion. Let's try to put that into some perspective. The entire U.S. GDP, everything America produces in a single year, is roughly $25 trillion. So, your plan would end up costing roughly 37% of the total U.S. economic output for an entire decade. Kennedy then did the math on a whiteboard, saying, as he wrote, "Now, you insist we'll pay for it by taxing the rich." Okay, let's actually look at that claim. The total wealth of all U.S. billionaires combined is approximately $5 trillion. If we actually confiscated, not taxed, but confiscated, every single penny from every billionaire in America, liquidated all their assets, took absolutely everything, we would get $5 trillion. He circled the numbers on the board. Your plan, again, costs $93 trillion. Confiscating all billionaire wealth nets us $5 trillion. You are a staggering $88 trillion short. That, Congresswoman, is not just a rounding error. That is, quite simply, a mathematical impossibility. Kennedy then turned to face her directly. So, please, educate me. Utilize your modern economic theory. Explain how you intend to pay for a $93 trillion plan when seizing all billionaire wealth only gets you $5 trillion. Show me the nuance I'm supposedly missing. Walk me through the complexity of it all. Silence. AOC opened her mouth, then closed it again. She just shuffled some papers. Kennedy's voice softened. That's okay. Let me explain this for you. You simply cannot afford it. Mathematically, it just doesn't work. You've thrown out a number that sounds groundbreaking and thrilling to anyone who hasn't grasped basic arithmetic. Yet, anyone with a grasp of fourth-grade math can instantly tell it's unfeasible. He collected his documents. Look, Congresswoman, this is the result when someone who just scraped by in undergraduate economics tries to lecture a person who learned from Nobel Prize-winning economists. You don't seem to grasp fundamental ideas like scarcity, trade-offs, or how taxes connect to revenue. What you do understand is merchandising. You understand branding. You definitely know how to pay your boyfriend using campaign money. And you understand capitalism perfectly well when you're the one making a profit. Kennedy's tone sharpened. You told me I needed an economics class. Congresswoman, what you need is a lesson in basic math, honesty, and how to spot hypocrisy when you're living it daily. He pulled out another huge folder. But if you believe your economic ignorance is bad, just wait until we look at the actual consequences of your policies in the real world. Let's discuss what happened when people actually took your advice. Let's talk about Amazon. He gazed into the camera. If you believe politicians should understand basic math before suggesting multi-trillion-dollar plans, then you absolutely need to hear what's coming next. Because we're going to see what AOC's economic brilliance actually looks like when it collides with reality. Kennedy's expression changed from amusement to something much more serious. Real anger mingled with deep disappointment. He retrieved a thick folder labeled Amazon HQ2 Economic Impact Analysis. Congresswoman, you tried to shift the conversation to your achievements, and you've repeatedly called killing the Amazon HQ2 deal in Queens your proudest moment. You celebrated it. You labeled it a win against corporate greed. You claimed you were shielding your community from gentrification and exploitation. He opened the folder, and his voice took on a harder edge. So, let's scrutinize your grand victory. Let's really see what you accomplished, because I believe the people of Queens deserve to understand what their representative truly cost them. Kennedy showed an economic impact study on the screen. In November 2018, Amazon declared they would construct their second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. This agreement promised 25,000 jobs over a decade to 15 years. The average salary was $150,000. The total economic impact over 10 years was projected to be $27 billion. The city and state offered $3 billion in tax incentives, which seems like a huge amount, until you consider the net tax revenue would still come out to $18 billion. Three different economists, one liberal, one conservative, and one independent, all studied the deal and reached the identical conclusion. It was an enormous win for New York. He took out job projections. But it wasn't only 25,000 direct Amazon jobs. The economic ripple effect was expected to generate an additional 67,000 indirect jobs. This included construction workers putting up the buildings, restaurant staff serving the employees, retail workers in all the new stores that would open, service industry positions, and countless small business opportunities. That's 75,000 total jobs created by just one project. Kennedy lifted his gaze from his papers, his voice heavy with emotion. And you destroyed it. You orchestrated protests. You pressured politicians. You called Amazon a greedy corporation that wasn't worthy of New York. And they walked away. They took the deal to Virginia instead. Virginia gained the jobs. Virginia gained the tax revenue. Virginia gained the economic growth. And Queens was left with you. He brought up a video player, queuing up testimony. I want you to meet a few individuals, Congresswoman, some people whose lives you profoundly altered when you killed this deal. The first video showed a middle-aged Latina woman sitting in a humble living room. This is Maria Torres. She's 52 years old and she works as an administrative assistant, earning $42,000 a year. When Amazon announced HQ2, she applied for a construction administrator role that would have paid $78,000. She advanced to the second round of interviews. She was qualified. She was thrilled. That job would have transformed her life. She could have cleared her debt, supported her daughter's college education, and perhaps even retired someday. Kennedy paused the video. But you killed the deal. Maria is still making $42,000, still struggling, still living paycheck to paycheck. But at least you protected her from corporate greed, right? The next video displayed a young Asian man in his late 20s. This is James Park, who holds a computer science degree from CUNY. He grew up right here in Flushing. He loves his neighborhood. He loves his community. Amazon offered him a software engineering job beginning at $120,000. When you ended the deal, James was left with a choice: stay in Queens without that position or relocate. He moved to Seattle, taking the very same Amazon job, just out there. Kennedy's voice began to rise. James isn't in Queens any longer. His family is still there. His friends are still there. His community remains right there, but he's gone. All because you decided that corporate greed mattered more than keeping talented young people in their own communities. Virginia and Washington got James. Queens, however, lost him. Quite a victory, Congresswoman. Then a third video played. An older man, clearly upset, sat in what looked like a closed restaurant. This is Robert Santos. He had owned a restaurant near the proposed Amazon site for 32 long years. When Amazon announced the project, Robert immediately saw opportunity. He took out loans to expand, he hired more staff, and he upgraded his kitchen. He was getting ready for the boom. Kennedy paused the video, his voice now heavy. When you killed that deal, Robert was left with debt he couldn't possibly pay, and expenses he simply couldn't cover. He held on for 18 grueling months, but finally closed his doors in 2000. 32 years in business, a family legacy, all gone because you simply didn't understand that sometimes business growth actually helps working people. He then pulled out a comprehensive report. And Roberts not alone. 47 small businesses in the Long Island City area closed down between 2019 and 2021. They had expanded, anticipating Amazon's arrival. They had hired staff. They had invested their hard-earned money. And when you pulled the rug out from under them, they simply collapsed. Kennedy's voice was truly rising now. Genuine anger was clearly coming through. But let's talk about the much bigger picture. Those 67,000 jobs that would have been created. Let's put that into human terms. That's 67,000 families with significantly better incomes. That's kids who could have gone to college. That's parents who could have retired with dignity. That's people who could have afforded health care, bought homes, and built wealth, all gone because of your sheer economic illiteracy. He then pulled out tax revenue projections, the $18 billion in net tax revenue that New York ultimately lost. You know what that could have funded? Schools, infrastructure, housing programs, all the social programs you claim to support, yet you killed the very deal that would have paid for them. Kennedy walked directly toward her position, his folksy manner now completely gone. And here's perhaps the most infuriating part of it all. Just 6 months after you killed 25,000 jobs in Queens, where did you move from your modest apartment in the Bronx? To a luxury building in Navy Yard, D.C. Your rent went from $1,600 to $3,400. Oh, you could certainly afford the upgrade, because you're making $174,000 a year in congressional salary, plus all that merchandise income, plus your speaking fees. His voice dripped with pure contempt. Maria Torres, though, can't afford an upgrade. She's still stuck in the same apartment, still struggling with that very same salary. James Park had to leave his home. Robert Santos lost his entire business. But you're doing absolutely fantastic, living in luxury, driving your Tesla, attending galas. The consequences of your decisions simply don't affect you at all. Kennedy returned to his desk, pulled out a final document, and then asked, "And you know what the cruelest irony is? Amazon, you see, is doing just fine. They took their deal to Virginia. Like I said, they're building HQ2 right there, creating those very same jobs, generating that identical economic growth. Everything you claimed would happen in Queens is happening, just in Virginia instead. You didn't stop Amazon. You didn't strike a blow against corporate greed. You merely deprived your own constituents of vital opportunity." He looked directly at her, his voice now quiet, but incredibly cutting. "You didn't fight corporate greed, Congresswoman. You fought opportunity. You fought prosperity. You fought working-class families who were simply trying to get ahead. And you did it from a position of privilege that none of them will ever know." Kennedy then gathered his papers. "Those 25,000 jobs are real jobs right now in Virginia, making $150,000 a year, supporting families and creating vital opportunities. And every single one of them could have been right there in Queens. They could have been your constituents. They could have been Maria and James and all the families of people who shopped at Robert's restaurant." His voice rose to a dramatic crescendo. "But you decided that ideology was far more important than true opportunity. You decided your brand, being the anti-corporate warrior, was more important than people's actual livelihoods, and Queens will be recovering from your decision for decades to come." He looked directly into the camera. "If you know someone who truly lost out because of that Amazon decision, if you're tired of politicians who sacrifice real people for cheap political points, if you understand that sometimes business growth actually helps communities, Then share this, because 67,000 lost jobs truly deserve to be remembered. Kennedy turned back to AOC. But we're not done examining the full consequences of your economic genius. Let's talk about yet another brilliant idea you championed. Defunding the police. Because that worked out so well, didn't it? Kennedy pulled out a new folder, his face showing a mix of anger and genuine sadness. Congresswoman, in 2020, you became one of the loudest voices advocating for defunding police departments. You marched right alongside activists. You gave passionate speeches. You constantly tweeted about it. You truly made it your personal mission. So, let's take a look at what happened when people actually listened to you. He then pulled out a collection of her very own statements. Allow me to read some of your quotes. In June 2020, you said, defunding police means defunding police. In July 2020, you stated, we need to completely reimagine public safety. And in August 2020, you declared, police departments are inherently violent institutions. These quotes aren't being taken out of context. These represent your actual positions, your beliefs, and your policy advocacy. Kennedy then showed crime statistics on the screen. New York City actually listened to you. In June 2020, the City Council voted to cut the NYPD's budget by a massive $1 billion. Yes, $1 billion. You celebrated that. You even called it a victory for justice. So, let's examine the real cost of that supposed victory. He read from NYPD crime statistics, but he narrated them like personal stories. In 2019, before any cuts, New York had 319 murders. By 2020, right after you defunded the police, that number tragically jumped to 468. That's an additional 149 murders. That isn't just a cold statistic, Congresswoman. That represents 149 families who lost someone dear to them. 149 funerals were held. 149 lives were abruptly ended because the very police department you gutted couldn't protect them. Kennedy's voice started to grow heavier. Shootings alarmingly doubled from 77 to 1,531. Grand larceny, which is serious theft, increased by 66%. Burglaries were up by 42%. Felony assaults saw a 17% rise. Every single major crime category showed an increase. The city became noticeably and significantly less safe, all thanks to the policies you championed. He then pulled out several letters, holding them up for everyone to see. I have direct testimony from people who were directly affected by this. Let me read just one to you. Kennedy's voice was thick with emotion as he began reading. Dear Senator Kennedy, my name is Carmen Ramirez. I live in the South Bronx, right in Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's district. On March 15, 2021, my 19-year-old son, Marcus, was walking home from his job at a grocery store. Two men suddenly tried to rob him. He had only $47 in his pocket, which were his tips from that night. They shot him for just $47. I called 911 at 10:47 p.m. The police finally arrived at 11:10 p.m. That's 23 agonizing minutes. Before the budget cuts, the average response time in my neighborhood was 8 minutes. Just 8 minutes. If they'd arrived in 8 minutes, maybe Marcus would still be alive today. Maybe I would still have my son here with me. Maybe I would still have grandchildren someday. But Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez said we absolutely needed to defund the police. She confidently said we would actually be safer. She was completely wrong. My son is dead, and she has never even bothered to call me. The entire hearing room fell into an absolute silence. Kennedy carefully sat the letter back down. Carmen wrote that letter 6 months ago. You still haven't called her. You still haven't acknowledged Marcus's death. Yet you've made dozens of Instagram videos about police violence. It's quite funny how that works, isn't it? He then pulled out yet another letter. This one is from David Chen. He owned a grocery store in Flushing for 40 long years. After the budget cuts and the resulting officer shortages, his store was robbed 3 separate times in 2021. Each time, the police took over an hour to respond. Each time, he asked for increased patrols in the area. Each time, he was simply told there weren't enough officers available. In December 2021, he finally closed his beloved store. It became too dangerous and far too expensive to maintain security without proper police support. 40 years of dedicated service to his community just gone. Kennedy looked up, his voice now sounding very hard. But here is where your hypocrisy truly reaches obscene levels. He then pulled out security expenditure reports. While you were busy defunding the police for regular New Yorkers, how much did taxpayers actually spend protecting you? Let me tell you, Capitol Police protection when you're in D.C. cost $387,000 in 2021 alone. Plus, NYPD security detail when you visit New York cost another $120,000. That's over $500,000 in public money specifically protecting you, all while you actively strip protection away from your constituents. Kennedy then pulled out Capitol Police request logs, stating, "And you haven't just accepted that protection passively. You've actively requested additional security 17 times in just 2 years, for things like protests outside your office, for mean tweets, and for online threats. Every single time you feel unsafe, you immediately ask for more police protection." His voice then rose with righteous anger. Let me just make sure I understand this situation correctly. When you're scared, you get armed police officers at your side. When Carmen Ramirez's son is simply walking home from work, he gets a 23-minute response time and eventually a funeral. When you face online harassment, you get a dedicated security detail. When David Chen's store is being robbed, he gets an automated recording telling him officers are unavailable. You get protection, but working-class people in high-crime neighborhoods get reimagined public safety. Kennedy stood up, walking directly toward her. What exactly does reimagined public safety mean to Carmen Ramirez? It means she is burying her son. And what does it mean to David Chen? It means he is closing his business for good. So, what does that mean for the thousands of New Yorkers who've been victimized by this crime surge? Well, it means longer response times, fewer police officers on the street, and the harsh reality that their elected representative cares more about making political statements than they do about their safety. Kennedy then pulled out some comparative data. And you know what's really interesting? In wealthy neighborhoods across New York, specifically where your donors and celebrities live, they just went ahead and hired private security when you defunded the police. Crime barely increased there. But in poorer, working-class communities, crime absolutely exploded because they simply couldn't afford private security. They relied on public police. The very police you gutted. Kennedy's voice then became sharp, almost cutting. So, your defund policy created a 2-tiered system. Rich people get private security. Poor people, they get crime. You, Congresswoman, get $500,000 in police protection. Carmen Ramirez, however, gets a dead son and no call back. He returned to his seat. That's not criminal justice reform, Congresswoman. That's plain aristocracy. That's you living behind walls with armed guards, while the very people you represent are left to dodge bullets. And then you have the nerve to lecture people about privilege and systemic injustice. Kennedy then looked directly into the camera. If rising crime has affected you or someone you love, if you're tired of politicians who demand security for themselves while taking it away from you, if Marcus Ramirez deserves better than being ignored, then share this everywhere. He turned back to AOC. But I want to talk about one more example of your moral bankruptcy, because it really shows who you really are, better than anything else. Now, let's talk about your grandmother. Kennedy's tone shifted, becoming almost quiet, but the sheer anger underneath was still palpable. Congresswoman, back in June of 2021, you posted pictures on social media of your grandmother's home down in Puerto Rico. The roof was still damaged from Hurricane Maria, which had hit back in 2017, 4 years earlier. The conditions there were terrible. You blamed Trump. You blamed the federal government. You blamed everyone except yourself, and then you used your grandmother's suffering to score political points. He then pulled out the social media posts, displaying them on screen. You wrote, and I quote, "Just over a week ago, my abuela fell ill. I went to Puerto Rico to see her. It was my first time in a decade. This is her home. Hurricane Maria relief hasn't arrived yet. Trump blocked relief dollars for PR. People are being forced to flee ancestral homes, and developers are taking them." Kennedy looked up. Very moving, very emotional. There was great engagement on the post, and people responded with sympathy and outrage. They asked, how could the government let this happen? How could an elderly woman be left in these conditions? He then pulled out news articles. Then something truly interesting happened. A conservative commentator named Matt Walsh decided to set up a GoFundMe to help your grandmother. He wanted to prove that Americans truly care about people, regardless of their politics. And you know what happened? People started donating. Republicans, independents, even some Democrats. They raised over $100,000 in just 3 days. That's $100,000 to help your grandmother fix her home. Kennedy paused for a moment. Let that sink in. And what did you do, Congresswoman? You rejected it. You had your family outright refuse the money. Your grandmother continued living in that house with the damaged roof. And do you know why? He then pulled out her spokesperson's statement. Your spokesperson said, "We don't need money from right-wing provocateurs." That was the official position, wasn't it? The money came from the wrong people, so your grandmother couldn't have it. Better for her to suffer than accept help from conservatives. Kennedy's voice rose, filled with genuine anger. He said, "You exploited your grandmother's suffering for political points. You used her damaged home to attack Trump, to attack Republicans, to build your brand as someone who cares about Puerto Rico. And when people tried to help, when Americans from across the political spectrum actually donated their hard-earned money, you refused it. Why? Because accepting it would simply undermine your narrative." He then pulled out financial documents. Now, let's talk about your own finances during this exact time. Back in June 2021, when you posted those pictures, you were living in your $1,500 a month luxury apartment, driving your $48,000 Tesla. Your net worth at the time was approximately $1.5 million, mostly from your merchandise sales and speaking fees. Your grandmother, meanwhile, needed maybe $30,000 to fix her roof and make her house livable. Kennedy did the math right there on screen. You made $174,000 in congressional salary that year. You also made approximately $800,000 from merchandise and speaking fees. You had $1.5 million in net worth. Your grandmother needed just $30,000. That's a mere 2% of your net worth. You could have easily written a check. You could have fixed it yourself. You could have quietly helped your own family. His voice then became sharp. But you didn't, did you? You didn't help her. Instead, you just exploited her suffering for social media engagement. You took her damaged home and turned it into a weapon against your political rivals. Then, when those very rivals offered assistance, you rejected it on her behalf, simply because their help might tarnish your image. Kennedy then pulled out a series of timeline documents. And here's the truly disturbing part. For months, you continued to post about your grandmother's struggles. You featured her in countless speeches on Puerto Rico, climate change, and government failures. Yet you conveniently omitted that $100,000 had been raised and then turned down. You never once indicated that help was even available. Instead, you just kept exploiting her pain. He stared directly at AOC, his face clearly showing his disgust. So, let me just recap. You leveraged your grandmother's suffering for political gain, and when people offered to help, you rejected them because they belonged to the wrong political party. You allowed her to remain in deplorable conditions while you enjoyed a life of luxury. And you did all this while constantly professing your concern for the vulnerable, for family, and for community. Kennedy's voice then dropped, taking on a dangerous edge. Congresswoman, that's not politics. That's sociopathy. That's using your own grandmother as a mere prop. That's prioritizing your brand above her well-being. That's picking political advantage over your family. And it reveals to everyone exactly who you truly are. He pulled out one last document. Eventually, about 6 months later, your grandmother's roof was quietly fixed. There was no press release from you, no social media buzz, just a silent repair. Many suspect your family finally accepted some of that donated money once the news cycle had passed, but you've never confirmed it. How convenient. Kennedy then gathered his papers. You know what would have happened if I'd used my grandmother's suffering for political gain and then rejected help for her because it came from Democrats? I'd never win another election in Louisiana. But you? You gained sympathy. You got engagement. You got to keep playing the victim, all while victimizing your own family member. He looked directly into the camera. If this disgusts you as much as it should, if you believe family truly comes before politics, if you think using your grandmother's suffering for social media clout is morally bankrupt, then please share this everywhere. Kennedy turned back to AOC, his expression now completely cold. But we're running short on time, so let me tie all of this together. Allow me to give you the education you so generously offered me. Let me show you what real economics truly looks like. And let me explain why everything you believe is fundamentally flawed. Kennedy stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked purposefully to the center of the hearing room. His entire demeanor had shifted dramatically. Gone was the folksy charm, the Southern gentleman act. This was a prosecutor, delivering his final closing argument. Congresswoman, earlier in this hearing, you suggested I take an economics class. You implied that I'm too old, too Southern, too uneducated to grasp your modern economic theories. You explicitly stated, I rely on outdated thinking and don't grasp contemporary economic systems. He paused, looking directly at her. So, allow me to return the favor. Let me educate you, not with trendy buzzwords and empty slogans, but with genuine economic principles, with logic, with arithmetic, and with reality. Kennedy then pulled out his comprehensive notes. At its core, economics isn't actually that complicated. It's all about trade-offs. Resources are inherently scarce. Time is always limited. Every single choice we make comes with an opportunity cost. When you decide to spend money on one item, you simply can't spend it on something else. When you put one policy into action, you must also accept its consequences. These aren't just abstract theories. These are fundamental realities of how our world operates. He then displayed a simple chart. You want to dedicate $93 trillion to the Green New Deal. All right, for the sake of discussion, let's just accept that figure. Where exactly does that kind of money come from? You suggest we tax the rich. We've already established that's mathematically impossible. Seizing all billionaire wealth would net you $5 trillion, not the $93 trillion you're talking about. So, let's examine what would realistically happen. Kennedy walked to a whiteboard and began writing. To generate $93 trillion over 10 years, the federal government would need to increase its annual revenue by $9.3 trillion. Currently, federal revenue sits around $4.5 trillion. This means you'd need to more than triple our current tax revenue. That translates to tax rates rising for everyone across all income levels, not just the wealthy. Middle-class families in particular would see their taxes double or even triple. He turned to face her directly. Now, what exactly happens when you triple taxes? Basic economics, the kind taught at respected universities like Vanderbilt and Oxford, informs us that excessively high tax rates inevitably stifle economic activity. People tend to work less when they get to keep a smaller portion of their earnings. Businesses, likewise, invest less when their profits face heavier taxation. Consequently, economic growth slows down significantly, or even grinds to a complete halt. Kennedy continued writing more numbers. When economic growth decelerates, tax revenue actually shrinks, rather than growing. It's known as the Laffer curve. High tax rates actually bring in less money than moderate ones because they really hurt the economy. So, your plan to collect $93 trillion by taxing the wealthy would actually make the economy smaller and bring in less overall revenue. You'd end up with less cash, not more. He put down the marker and walked towards her. But let's just pretend we ignore all of that. Let's imagine some magic happens and you actually get your $93 trillion. What would you truly achieve? You want to get rid of fossil fuels within 10 years? That's 10 million direct and indirect jobs in oil, gas, coal, and all related industries. What's going to happen to those people? Kennedy's voice got stronger. You talk about job retraining. Great. Wonderful. Let me tell you about Joe Thompson. That's a fictional name, but it's based on dozens of real people I've actually met. Joe is 52 years old. He's been working in coal mines in West Virginia for 30 years. He earns $67,000 a year. It's hard work, dangerous work, but it's honest work that supports his family. He really painted the picture. Under your plan, Joe loses his job. You offer him job retraining to become a solar panel installer. That job pays $32,000 a year, which is less than half of what he currently makes. Joe has a mortgage payment of $400 a month. His daughter is in college at $15,000 a year. His wife has medical bills. How is Joe supposed to survive on $32,000 when his expenses demand $67,000? Kennedy's voice grew louder. He can't. He loses his house. His daughter has to drop out of college. His family falls apart. But you don't care about Joe, because Joe doesn't live in Brooklyn or Queens. Joe lives in West Virginia, in a place you've never been and will never visit. Joe is just collateral damage in your revolution. He pulled out even more data, and Joe is just one of 10 million. 10 million people whose jobs you'd eliminate. 10 million families you'd destroy. All for a plan that wouldn't even achieve its goals because China, India, and developing nations would keep using fossil fuels, making the American sacrifice totally pointless. Kennedy walked to another part of the board. But let's talk about your other brilliant policy, defunding the police. You saw what happened in New York. Crime skyrocketed. Response times went way up. People died. Basic economics easily explains why. When you decrease the supply of something, in this case, police protection, and demand stays the same, you end up with shortages, longer response times, less coverage, and more crime. He turned to face her. The people who suffer the most from less police protection are poor people in high-crime neighborhoods. Rich people can just hire private security. They're fine. But working-class families who rely on public police services, they truly suffer. That's just basic economics. You cut down on the supply, created a shortage, and the poorest people were the ones who paid the price. Kennedy's voice became sharp. Now, let's discuss Amazon. You messed up a deal that would have created 67,000 jobs and generated $27 billion in economic growth. You called it corporate greed, saying the tax incentives were corporate welfare. Let me explain why you're completely wrong. He wrote on the board again. Amazon would have contributed $27 billion in total economic value over 10 years. New York offered $3 billion in tax incentives. That's a net benefit of $24 billion. That's not welfare. That's an investment that gives an 800% return. No investor anywhere would pass up that deal. Kennedy looked at her. But you don't understand investment. You don't understand that sometimes you give up a little short-term revenue to get massive long-term growth. You see $3 billion in tax breaks and instantly think giveaway, without grasping the $27 billion you'd get back. That's not economics. That's economic illiteracy. He went back to his seat and took out his detailed notes. Let me tell you about my economics education, since you suggested I needed one. Kennedy's voice became formal and professional. I studied economics at Vanderbilt University, where I learned about supply and demand, market equilibrium, and how price signals help allocate resources. I graduated with honors. Then I went to the University of Virginia School of Law, where I studied constitutional economics, which is how economic principles interact with legal and political systems. After that, I went to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship. He paused for effect. At Oxford, I studied under Professor John Eatwell, among others. Professor Eatwell taught me advanced economic theory, including socialist and Marxist economics. I didn't just learn why socialism sounds so good in theory. I learned why it fails in practice, why central planning can't possibly match market efficiency, why taking away profit incentives reduces innovation and productivity, why every socialist experiment in history has ended in poverty, authoritarianism, or both. Kennedy's voice grew stern. I've forgotten more about economics than you've ever learned. I've studied it longer than you've been alive. I've personally witnessed socialist policies crumble in actual countries, shattering real economies and devastating countless lives. And I've seen bartenders turned politicians, armed with bachelor's degrees and boundless confidence, lecture folks on economics, despite knowing absolutely nothing about it. He stood once more, stepping closer to her. Care to hear what modern economics actually teaches? It teaches that incentives are crucial, that free markets distribute resources far more efficiently than governments, that property rights foster prosperity, and that socialist policies ultimately fail because they clash with fundamental human nature. People put in more effort when they directly gain from their hard work. Kennedy then pulled out a stack of academic papers. These documents came from today's leading economists, Nobel Prize winners, Federal Reserve officials, people at the absolute pinnacle of their profession. Every single one of them states your Green New Deal is completely clueless, Economically speaking, not Republican talking points, this is established economic consensus. Your policies simply don't work. They've never succeeded, and they'll never work because they completely disregard fundamental economic realities. He stared right at her, his voice taking on a more personal tone. You've never once created a job. You've never built a business either. You've never had to meet a payroll. You've never struggled with the tough choice between paying rent and buying food. You went from bartender to congresswoman to millionaire in 3 years. You live a life of luxury, drive a Tesla, wear designer clothes, eat at expensive restaurants, and yet you lecture working people about making sacrifices. Kennedy's voice began to swell, reaching a peak. You eliminated 67,000 jobs with your Amazon decision. You then caused a massive crime surge with your defund policy. You even exploited your own grandmother to score political points. You also funneled campaign money to your boyfriend. You sell $4 million worth of merchandise, all while preaching against capitalism. You reside in a 3D $400 apartment, yet you represent people who are struggling to pay $800 in rent. You attend $35,000 galas, all while lecturing others about inequality. He walked directly to where she sat, looking down at her intently. And you possess the audacity, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance to suggest that I need an economics education. Kennedy's voice then dropped, becoming quiet, yet somehow dangerous. Allow me to tell you what I grasp, that you clearly don't. I understand that capitalism has pulled more individuals out of poverty than any other system throughout human history. I understand that free markets succeed, while central planning inevitably fails. I understand that having jobs is superior to receiving handouts. Opportunity surpasses dependency, and freedom is far better than government control. I understand that when politicians promise free things, someone, somewhere, always ends up paying the price. I understand that good intentions don't absolve bad outcomes. He collected his accordion file, lifting it high. This file holds your entire record, your votes, your statements, your policies, and your failures. Every single piece of evidence I've shown today originated from your very own actions, your own words, and your own choices. I didn't invent any of it, nor I did not take anything out of context. This is precisely who you are. Kennedy then looked into the camera one last time. If you're tired of privileged socialists who've never actually created a single job lecturing you about economics, if you're tired of politicians who embrace a capitalist lifestyle while simultaneously preaching socialism, if you're tired of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, then share this everywhere. Record it. Save it. Show it to anyone who believes she represents the future of anything at all. Because Americans truly deserve better than a congresswoman who misunderstands economics, struggles with basic math, and can't tell the difference between an empty slogan and a real solution. He turned back to AOC, his face now completely cold. "Class dismissed, Congresswoman," he stated. "I hope you learned something, though given your entire record, I seriously doubt it." Kennedy sat back down, snapping his accordion file shut with finality, and folded his hands. The hearing room fell into an absolute hush. You could hear people breathing, camera shutters clicking, and someone nervously clearing their throat, yet no one uttered a word. AOC remained frozen in her seat. Her face displayed a volatile mix of rage and deep humiliation. She had entered the hearing feeling confident, surrounded by her squad supporters, fully prepared to promote her Green New Deal. She had insulted Kennedy, believing he was an easy mark, just an old Southern senator she could embarrass with her supposedly superior modern understanding. Instead, she had been systematically dismantled. Every single policy was scrutinized and found to be lacking. Every claim she made was debunked with concrete evidence. Every defense she offered was demolished by undeniable facts. Her lifestyle hypocrisy was glaringly exposed. Her economic illiteracy was laid bare for all to see. Her moral bankruptcy was thoroughly documented. The committee chairman then cleared his throat. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he asked, "would you care to respond to Senator Kennedy's questions?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, and tried once more. Nothing coherent managed to come out. She frantically shuffled through papers, desperately searching for talking points. But what could she possibly say? Everything Kennedy had presented was thoroughly documented. Her own words, her own votes, her own financial records, all public information. This is clearly a partisan attack. She finally managed to speak, her voice shaking. "Based on sexism and ageism, and ma'am," Kennedy interrupted gently, his Southern courtesy returning, "I cited your own campaign finance filings, your public statements, your voting record, and basic arithmetic. If facts are sexist, then reality itself has a bias problem." AOC tried again. "The senator is taking things out of context, and I read your full speeches. I provided complete quotes. I gave context. The context makes it worse, not better." She made one more attempt. "This hearing is a distraction from real issues." Kennedy smiled that dangerous smile. "The real issues are economic literacy, honest government, and understanding that policies have consequences. We just spent 2 hours on real issues. Very real. Painfully real for the 67,000 people who didn't get Amazon jobs, and for Carmen Ramirez, who lost her son." AOC stood abruptly, gathered her papers with shaking hands, and walked out. She didn't wait to be dismissed. She didn't make a closing statement. She just left her squad supporters scrambling after her, the cameras capturing every moment of her retreat. The hearing room erupted. Reporters sprinted for the exits, already typing on their phones. Conservative gallery members applauded, not mockingly, but in genuine appreciation for accountability. Even some Democrats looked thoughtful, troubled by what they'd witnessed. Kennedy just sat quietly, organizing his papers back into that massive accordion file, looking like he'd just finished a routine day at the office. Because, for him, it was routine. 40 years as a lawyer. Prepare thoroughly. Present evidence clearly. Let facts speak. And when someone insults you, prove them wrong so completely they can't recover within 12 minutes. Louisiana lesson was trending #1 on Twitter globally. Within an hour, the video clips had 15 million views. By the end of the day, 89 million people had watched some portion of Kennedy's systematic dismantling of AOC's record. Every major news outlet had to cover it. CNN tried to defend her, but couldn't get around the documented evidence. MSNBC called it troubling, but had to acknowledge the facts. Fox News played it on loop. Conservative outlets called it the greatest political takedown in modern history. But the impact went deeper than cable news chatter. The next morning, a moderate Democrat named Jennifer Williams announced a primary challenge to AOC. Williams was a former prosecutor, daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants, and grew up in the Bronx. Her announcement speech was simple. "I love our community. I understand economics, and I won't use my grandmother's suffering for Instagram likes." Within the first week, Williams raised $3.2 million, which was more than AOC raised in her entire first campaign. Donations poured in from across the country, from conservatives who'd never vote for a Democrat but wanted AOC gone. They also came from moderate Democrats, embarrassed by her extremism. Funds also came from people who'd lost Amazon jobs, from crime victims, and from families struggling with energy costs. The polling data was devastating. AOC's approval rating in her district dropped 34 points in 2 weeks. Her negative numbers were brutal. 67% said she didn't understand economics. 71% said she cared more about fame than constituents. 58% said she should resign. Even worse for her, the squad started distancing themselves. Rashida Tlaib made vague statements about focusing on Detroit. Ayanna Pressley suddenly had scheduling conflicts when asked to campaign with AOC. Even Ilhan Omar, not exactly known for political wisdom herself, quietly stopped mentioning her. National Democratic leadership saw the writing on the wall. They privately asked AOC to step back from high-profile positions. When she refused, they stripped her of committee assignments, citing the need for members who understood policy details. Her media appearances quickly dried up. Cable news stopped booking her. The Kennedy hearing had exposed her too thoroughly, making her too much of a liability. Political shows didn't want guests who could be destroyed with basic fact-checking. Even friendly outlets became cautious. Her merchandise empire collapsed. It turns out people don't want to buy "Tax the Rich" sweatshirts from someone exposed as a champagne socialist. Sales dropped 87% within a month. Her campaign had to lay off staff. They couldn't afford the fancy offices and had to scale back operations dramatically. Speaking fees plummeted from $40,000 per appearance to just $5,000, and even those dried up as organizations realized she was more liability than draw. Her luxury apartment became unaffordable. She quietly moved to a modest one-bedroom in a less trendy neighborhood. But the most significant impact was on progressive politics more broadly. That Kennedy hearing really showed everyone what happens when progressive ideas get put under the microscope. When catchy slogans ran into hard facts and overconfident opinions met solid evidence, other progressive politicians began to dial back their stances. Mentions of the Green New Deal started sounding less clear, becoming much more vague. Calls to defund the police quickly shifted to reform the police. All the talk about a socialist revolution calmed down quite a bit. Just 18 months after that pivotal moment in Louisiana, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lost her primary election to Jennifer Williams by a whopping 23 points. It wasn't even a close call. Her constituents had simply had enough. They were looking for someone who genuinely understood economics, who actually showed up for their community, and who put the Bronx first, not Instagram. Today, AOC is no longer serving in Congress. She now works as a political commentator for some niche progressive platforms, making podcasts and YouTube videos for audiences that seem to get smaller every month. She still posts on X, but the interaction she gets is just a tiny fraction of what it used to be. The blue check mark might still be there, but her real influence has completely vanished. She now lives in a modest apartment right there in the Bronx. She even had to sell her Tesla, trading it in for a used Honda. Her designer wardrobe is long gone. That luxurious lifestyle she once had just disappeared. She experienced a real-time downgrade in her own life, truly understanding what her proposed policies would have actually done to millions of Americans. Her planned memoir was quietly dropped by her publisher. The documentary about her, which was already in production, ended up being shelved. She's gone from being a rising star to more of a cautionary tale. Nowadays, political science professors often use the Kennedy hearing as a perfect example of what happens when thorough preparation meets a big opportunity, when actual facts win out over empty slogans. And Senator John Kennedy? He's still there in the Senate. still asking questions with that signature folksy accent. And he's still pulling out those famous accordion files whenever someone needs to be held accountable. That very file from the AOC hearing was eventually given to the Smithsonian, now considered an artifact of political history. But even more importantly, Kennedy managed to prove something truly vital. Respect isn't something you get because of your age, your accent, or even where you're from. It's earned through genuine knowledge, unwavering integrity, and consistent results. And if you're missing all three of those things, it's probably best not to insult someone who clearly has them. That accordion file truly became legendary around Washington. Now, whenever politicians have to testify before any committee Kennedy is on, they prepare with extreme thoroughness. They double-check every single fact. They meticulously verify all their numbers. They even ensure their personal lifestyle aligns perfectly with their public statements. Because absolutely no one wants to end up being the next AOC. The lesson from Louisiana wasn't just about one congresswoman's spectacular downfall. It was really about facts winning out over feelings, clear math over abstract ideology, and genuine competence over mere confidence. It highlighted the crucial understanding that you simply can't spend money you don't possess, no matter how good your intentions might be. That cutting jobs always ends up hurting the very people who held them. That pulling funds from the police often results in an increase in crime. That using your own family for political advantage is, quite frankly, morally corrupt. It was about truly grasping that experience genuinely matters. That education goes far beyond just a bachelor's degree. And that someone who studied under actual Nobel Prize winners probably understands more about economics than someone who just bartended their way through college. But at its very core, it was all about accountability. It was about the belief that politicians should be judged by their actual results, not just their words, by their proven competence, not just their self-assurance, by whether they genuinely help people, not simply how good they look on social media. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, at one point, thought just 9 simple words would totally embarrass an old Southern senator. Those words were, perhaps the senator should take an economics class. 9 words, delivered with such casual disdain, such undeserved arrogance, and an absolute certainty that she was smarter than everyone else in the room. She was dead wrong. And for 2 solid hours, Senator John Kennedy, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford economist, and Louisiana lawyer, gave her an education she never saw coming and will certainly never forget. He taught her that capitalism actually pulls people out of poverty, while socialism tends to keep them stuck in it. That free markets truly work, and central planning consistently fails. That real jobs are always better than endless handouts, and true opportunity always beats dependency. That having good intentions doesn't excuse bad results, and confidence is absolutely no replacement for actual competence. He showed her that when you eliminate 67,000 jobs, real families suffer. That when you defund the police, crime inevitably goes up. That when you take advantage of your own grandmother, people definitely notice. That when you live the life of a capitalist, but constantly preach socialism, you're nothing but a hypocrite. That when you secretly funnel campaign money to your boyfriend while publicly railing against corruption, you're acting like a total fraud. Most importantly, he taught her, and everyone else who was watching, that actions have consequences, that policies impact real human lives, that elections truly matter, and that basic arithmetic simply doesn't care about your political ideology. That accordion file contained 37 distinct sections of documentation, hundreds of pages, thousands of undeniable facts, all of it public record, and all of it, ultimately, AOC's own making. Senator Kennedy didn't actually destroy Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's career that day. She actually brought it down herself through years of pure hypocrisy, along with economic illiteracy and, frankly, moral bankruptcy. Kennedy simply documented it all, organized it, and then presented it clearly enough so that everyone could clearly see it. That's not some kind of partisan attack. That right there is accountability. And honestly, it's pretty beautiful. If you're someone who believes that competence always beats confidence, if you think experience truly matters more than just catchy slogans, if you're fed up with privileged socialists constantly lecturing working Americans about economics, all while they're living in luxury, then share this story everywhere and make sure to comment below with your own experience regarding politicians who promise absolutely everything but then deliver absolutely nothing. Because this, truly, is what accountability genuinely looks like. This is precisely what happens when hard facts go up against feelings, and the facts ultimately win. This is exactly what happens when a bartender, who just happens to have a bachelor's degree, insults a Rhodes Scholar, armed with nothing but an accordion file. Senator John Kennedy didn't simply defeat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on that day. He truly reminded America that we absolutely don't have to put up with economic illiteracy, blatant moral hypocrisy, and even confident ignorance from our very own representatives. We have every right to demand better. We can certainly expect more from them. We can hold them accountable. And when they try to insult us, or insult those who actually represent us, well, we can educate them right back, ourselves. That's not being simple-minded at all. No, that's truly American. Class dismissed.